Virtual 11 is Iron Maiden's 11th album and would be their second and last to feature their vocalist Blaze Bayley. And after the X Factor, Iron Maiden sort of came out their sort of dark period and went back to writing more upbeat, more music that would be more of something that Bruce Dickinson would do, whereas the X Factor was very clearly written for Blaze Bayley to sing, whereas a lot of songs on Virtual 11 Bruce can sing very well. Now this period of the band was commercially extremely unsuccessful for the band. This album, Virtual 11, peaked at number 16 in the UK, which is even lower than Killers. I think it's their lowest studio album, like, ever, which is just really shows how bad they were at the time. Even Blaze Bayley, even though he's an amazing vocalist, he had to cancel a lot of tours because he was straining his vocals too much by touring too much. Now, Bruce Dickinson was just a complete tank when it came to touring. He could just take it a lot, you know. But Blaze Bayley just couldn't take it, and due to lack of touring and lack of Bruce Dickinson, this is by far the least commercially successful period of the band. However, despite popular belief, this is actually has some really good writing on it, and some people would say it's one of their worst albums, but it's definitely not. It definitely features some amazing writing and some amazing melodies, and the band just getting along well and performing good music. Now, the artwork is done by Melvin Grant, and the artwork is pretty good. I actually really like it. I think it's pretty original with Eddie. He doesn't look like classic 80s Eddie, but I like the Eddie. And overall, it's one of Melvin Grant's better artworks. Now, the production's done by Nigel Green, who did the X Factor, and it definitely is much louder than the X Factor. It's more of the style of what Iron Maiden was writing at the time, which was going back to more sort of the style of what they were doing in the 80s with more upbeat kind of stuff. And yeah, overall the production's just pretty good, but still lacking in some areas. They kind of not as good as, say, Martin Birch would have done. Now, this album starts something that Iron Maiden would completely overdo in the 21st century, and I'm going to introduce a new term to you, which is created by ex-YouTube user Maidenslave, and the term is called chorus retardation. And what it means is just repeating a chorus so many times that the chorus becomes retarded. And they do this a couple times on this album, on a few tracks, but they do it on almost every track in the 21st century, where they just play 4.5 minutes worth of content up to 8 or 9 minutes worth of length. So, but it's only on a couple tracks on this album, so that's good. So anyway, let's move on to the track by track. Now, this opens with Futureal, and Futureal is one of Iron Maiden's best openers, to be honest. It sort of goes back to what they were doing in the 80s, just come out straight up with a fast, heavy, short song, you know, completely contradicting what they were doing on the X Factor, which was, you know, having more of a build-up. But this is just straight in with some fast, heavy stuff. And yeah, it's a really, really catchy opener, and I really like it. It's one of the better songs on this album. And then we move on to Angel and the Gambler, which is by far the worst song in this album. This song is probably Iron Maiden's worst song. It's, the chorus retardation level is on overdrive, and it's like chorus retardation from like 0, which is just the right amount of choruses, to 10, which is like way too many, and then overdrive, which is Angel and the Gambler. That's the kind of scale of chorus retardation. And even though the chorus repeats too many times, the music itself is not good either. I mean, it has this keyboard opening riff that just sounds too commercial for Iron Maiden. It doesn't sound right. It just sounds too fluffy, sounds too poppy. It doesn't sound like Iron Maiden. And then the chorus isn't even that catchy, you know? If you're gonna repeat it like 4 billion times, at least make it catchy, but it's not even that catchy. And yeah, the whole song is just not written very good, and Blaze's tone is one of my least favorite Blaze Bayley performances, at least in Iron Maiden. And this happens on a couple of tracks where I just don't think Blaze Bayley's singing style fits the music they were writing. At some points, Blaze Bayley's voice fits the music perfectly 100%. But some tracks, it just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel like something that the band wrote for Blaze Bayley, which is what they were doing on the X Factor, completely writing for Blaze Bayley. But anyway, it's way, way, way too long. It's even longer than the actual epic done by Steve Harris, and it's not even like anything to save it. The guitar solos aren't that special. Weak chorus, weak everything. Probably Iron Maiden's worst song, to be honest. But anyway, let's move on. The next track is Lightning Strikes Twice, and this comes in with a pretty good riff, and I immediately like Blaze's vocals performance much more on this song than the previous song. And yeah, it's got a pretty catchy guitar line, but is kind of a little bit repetitive. Nowhere near Angela Gambler levels, but it's a little bit repetitive. But anyway, it's a pretty good song. And then we move on to the epic, The Clansman, which is by far the best song on this album. This song is just amazing. Probably Steve's most underrated epic. It's not his best, but it's definitely his most underrated. And this would be made a lot more famous by Bruce Dickinson's performance on Rock in Rio, which is really the only Bruce Dickinson performance of a Blaze Bayley track that is much better than the original. Sign of the Cross, Lord of the Flies, Man on the Edge, not that good. Lord of the Flies in particular is complete garbage by Bruce Dickinson. But the rest of the tracks just don't really add anything, and Blaze Bayley's voice fits better. But this song is just so good with Bruce. Every single note feels like Bruce is singing with more power, more range, more dynamisy. And Blaze Bayley, in comparison, feels emotionless and feels like he's not using his full range. Now, Bruce Dickinson obviously has a much bigger range, but Blaze Bayley doesn't even feel like he's using all of it. You know, every time Bruce Dickinson sings a high note, he'll sing it a little bit higher. Every time he sings a low note, he'll sing a little bit lower. Every time he goes into a fast part, he'll sing it a little bit faster. And that just goes so far. And honestly, that's one of my favorite Iron Maiden performances of all time, is Rock in Rio, The Clansman. But anyway, Blaze Bayley's performance is not bad. But anyway, let's just talk more about the actual song. Now, the lyrics are about medieval Scotland and basically about Braveheart, which came out a few years prior to this album. And yeah, it's about Scottish Revolution and all that kind of stuff, all that kind of good stuff like freedom and stuff like that. And it comes in with a really soft, mellow riff that's really haunting too. And I really like the performance because when Bruce is kind of introducing the song. But on the studio version, it's just that riff, and it's really good setup for the faster parts on this song. And yeah, after the really good intro comes in with some really good lyrics and just kind of builds up to a really great chorus too. It is kind of anthemic, though it's not like fully anthem style, but definitely has some anthemic elements. And yeah, overall, I just really like this song. It's not too long. It's not like Steve Harris, like 15-minute or 14-minute epics. It just feels like the right length, and has some good elements in there. Has some good guitar lines, good riffs, and good guitar solos too. And then the next track is When Lightning Strikes Twice. Now, this is a little bit more of a fillerish track on this album, but it's still really good, pretty catchy. But yeah, it's a little bit fillerish, and it's definitely not as good as the Clansman. And then moving on to the sixth track is The Educated Fool. The Educated Fool actually is a pretty good track. Has a great riff and has another really anthemic chorus. I actually even like Blaze Bayley's vocal performance on the chorus on this even more than the Clansman, because they're kind of similar in some ways. But it is a little bit repetitive. It's like over the 6-minute mark, and it's a little bit filler-ish, but it's still a pretty good track. And then the second to last track is Don't Look to the Eyes of the Stranger, which is definitely one of the more interesting tracks on this album. Has a really original riff that I really like, and has a really catchy chorus. But there's like a point in this song where it just kind of ends, and then after that point it starts again. And all it is just Blaze Bayley singing the chorus really softly, and then slowly singing it louder and louder and louder. I think there's another line somewhere in there. But really, after sort of the 4.5-minute mark where it ends, it should just stop there, to be honest. But the actual song is actually really good, really catchy chorus. great riff and all that stuff. And it's definitely one of the stronger tracks of this album, so I do quite like this song, even though they do the chorus retardation thing way too much. But it's not Angel and the Gambler overdrive chorus retardation. But the last track is Como Estás Amigo, which is Spanish for How Are You Friends? And this is definitely the second best track on this album. This track is just completely written for Blaze Bayley, and is a great way for Blaze Bayley to kind of exit Iron Maiden, because he would leave soon after this album's release. And it's honestly just a completely beautiful song, beautiful vocal performance, and seems like it has a bit of that power and a little bit of that just amazing raw performance from Blaze Bayley left over from the X Factor. And it has a beautiful riff to go along with it, and it's just a beautiful way to end this album. And that concludes the track list. Now, Virtual XI is criticized by a lot of people, and while some elements I can definitely see, this shows some great writing from Iron Maiden in songs like Clansman and Como Estas Amigos. And yeah, I really like this album. Stylistically, not as good as the X Factor. They went back to more of a kind of safety zone where they knew they could write music, whereas X Factor, they were really going out of their comfort zone, but really writing good music too. But Virtual XI is actually a really good album, and it's definitely not an album you can just kind of pass off. You really do have to listen to this album if you're an Iron Maiden fan. Even if you don't particularly like Blaze Bayley, you just have to listen to this album, because there is really good writing on it. And so overall, I think Virtual XI is definitely a good album, and I'm going to give it a 8 out of 10 later.